The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've had a massive break in the Trump-Russia fiasco, and there is massive news to report to you today, which is that President Donald Trump is now admitting that, yeah, the purpose of his campaign meeting with Russians, that infamous day in Trump Tower, was specifically to obtain dirt on Hillary Clinton during the campaign. They worked with Russia, President Trump admitting this, in a coordinated way with a scheduled meeting meant to get damaging information for the purposes of helping Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 presidential campaign. The circle now is almost complete. And remember, we go back to where the story started. There was no Russia story. There were no meetings. Then the right started shifting to collusion wouldn't actually be a crime anyway. And then in the last couple of weeks, last week I reported to you that Donald Trump's own attorney shifted from there was no collusion, there was no coordination, to I can't find in the criminal code where it even mentions collusion. That was Rudy Giuliani last week. And now for the first time, we have Donald Trump personally admitting that this Trump Tower meeting on June 9, 2016, with Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya was not about adoptions. It was to get dirt on Hillary Clinton. This is working with Russia on the presidential campaign. Here's Trump's tweet from Sunday morning, which was in response, it appears, to a Washington Post article pointing out that Donald Trump Jr. might be in serious legal trouble in this entire thing. That seemed to set Donald Trump off, who said, quote, "Fake news reporting, a complete fabrication, that I am concerned about the meeting my wonderful son Donald had in Trump Tower. This was a meeting to get information on an opponent, totally legal and done all the time in politics, and it went nowhere. I did not know about it." So Trump's still denying that he knew about it. Pretty clear at this point that he did. Talked about that last week. Claiming that it's done all the time. Well, not with foreign countries. We've heard from Democrats and Republicans alike that if they were approached by a foreign country offering something like this, they wouldn't set up a meeting. They would call the FBI, which we know the Trump administration did not do. But the big news here, it's important not to lose the thread because Trump wants to focus on it was legal and it's done all the time. This is the first admission from Donald Trump that the meeting took place with the goal of getting damaging information about his opponent, Hillary Clinton. This is something of value from a foreign power. And then, of course, aside from the meeting itself, this incident led to lies from Trump about his involvement after the fact. He dictated the response letter to this incident and the reporting of it by the New York Times after initially saying that he didn't dictate that letter. And then number two, lies about the subject of the meeting are now confirmed by Donald Trump. We were initially told it was about adoptions, which in a sense, it kind of was. So the Magnitsky Act is related to sanctions, and adoptions is sort of quid pro quo it's an intimated quid pro quo that if the Hillary dirt helps Trump win, then the future Trump administration would look at rewarding Russia with eased sanctions. Now we know, because Trump himself said it, this was about dirt on Hillary, period. Trump's campaign was offered things of value by Russia, and they accepted the offer. The only step remaining to fully close the circle would be proof of what Trump's former personal lawyer alleged last week, which is that Trump knew about the meeting in advance. Trump still claims that he didn't know about that. We don't know if we're eventually going to get proof of that or not. All of the circumstantial and timing evidence suggests Trump knew ahead of time. And in addition to that, the question of whether anything came of it. The narrative so far from people who have been caught lying multiple times has been, we had the meeting, we were promised dirt on Hillary, we wanted the dirt on Hillary, but we didn't ultimately get it. That's what we were told. We didn't ultimately get the dirt on Hillary. What's going to be next? You know, we got some dirt, and it was patriotic because it kept Hillary out of the White House, because Russia wanted epic, make America great again, winner Trump to win. That's the only part of the circle left to be filled, potentially.
Hey, I mean, these guys, Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, they had never worked on a political campaign before. It was their first time. And sometimes when you dip your toe into the water of a political campaign, you accidentally commit a few federal offenses. That just happens to anyone.
What are the legal implications? This could make Donald Trump's admission that the point of this meeting was to obtain dirt on his opponent from a foreign country. This could make the meeting itself conspiracy with a foreign country. This could make the lies about the meeting obstruction of justice, conspiracy, and false statements to the feds, if false statements to the feds were made. And it appears that they probably were at this point, given what Donald Trump Jr. reportedly told investigators and in a hearing, rather. He has not necessarily said that to investigators, and what Trump is now admitting the meeting was for. Potentially multiple federal crimes by many people implied by this tweet by Donald Trump. But the big question remains, which is, will anyone, and specifically Trump, pay for it? And the answer, if you don't go out in November and vote, is probably not. And by the way, still some people emailing me saying there's no Russia story, but very few at this point. Very few people still emailing me saying there's no Russia story. Lastly, we always have to ask, is this a strategy or is this stupidity? Donald Trump saying this on Twitter. It's never clear. It's a possible strategy to create chaos with the contradictions. It could be trying to get out in front of the story before it breaks in a more damaging way. It could be idiocy and ignorance. It could be a combination of all of these. But what I return to every time is look at the evolution. There was no meeting. There was a meeting to discuss adoptions. There was a meeting to discuss dirt on Hillary, but we didn't get the dirt. And the next logical step, if these are all lies, is we did get dirt, but nothing illegal took place. Or we did get dirt, but we didn't ultimately need it because Hillary's campaign was such a disaster. Every single week, we learn about more lies that have been told to us. The Trump war on the media and a free press continues, and the theme is this phrase, the enemy of the people. The enemy of the people is the phrase that keeps coming up about the press by Donald Trump and by his cronies. And Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, was asked directly a number of times during a press briefing late last week, as the weekend was kicking off, is the press the enemy of the people as far as she is concerned and or as far as the Trump administration is concerned? She was asked this by the press at a press briefing, and one of the ways this is being written up is Sarah Huckabee Sanders refuses to deny that the press is the enemy of the American people. What you have to understand, and I'm going to play a clip for you here, is that when she said time and again, I'm here to represent the president's views, and the president has made his views clear, it's more than a non-denial that they see the press as the enemy of the American people. It is the acknowledgement that they see the press as the enemy of the American people. She refused to say no multiple times and said that Trump has already spoken about this. It's a slightly longer clip I'm going to play for you because I want you to pay attention to the dynamics of how there are multiple opportunities for her to just say, no, big picture, I or the Trump administration, whoever she's speaking for at the time, don't see the press as the enemy of the American people. She doesn't do that. She does believe, and she is restating that the Trump administration does believe that the press is the enemy of the American people. Let's take a look.
Jim? I just wanted to follow up on Sarah's question from NPR. She asked you about Ivanka Trump's statement that the press is not the enemy of the people. And she asked you whether or not the press is the enemy of the people. You read off a laundry list of your concerns about the press and things that you feel like are misreported, but you did not say that the press is not the enemy of the people. And I think it would be a good thing if you were to say right here at this briefing that the press, the people who are gathered in this room right now, doing their jobs every day, asking questions of officials like the ones you brought forward earlier, are not the enemy of the people. I think we deserve that. I
think the president has made his position known. I also think it's ironic.
Would you mind telling us,
I'm trying to answer your question. Okay, well, I politely waited, and I even called on you despite the fact that you interrupted me while calling on your colleague. Well, I said it's ironic.
Which is why I interrupted.
I'm trying.
But if you finish, if you would not mind letting me have a follow-up, that would be fine. But
it's ironic, Jim, that not only you and the media attack the president for his rhetoric when they frequently lower the level of conversation in this country. Repeatedly, the media resorts to personal attacks without any content other than to incite anger. The media has attacked me personally on a number of occasions, including your own network, said I should be harassed as a life sentence, that I should be choked. ICE officials are not welcomed in their place of worship, and personal information is shared on the internet. When I was hosted by the Correspondents Association, of which almost all of you are members of, you brought a comedian up to attack my appearance and call me a traitor to my own gender. In fact, as I know, as far as I know, I'm the first press secretary in the history of the United States that's required Secret Service protection. The media continues to ratchet up the verbal assault against the president and everyone in this administration, and certainly we have a role to play, but the media has a role to play for the discourse in this country as well.
And sir, if you don't mind, if I may follow up, excuse me, you did not say in the course of those remarks that you just made that the press is not the enemy of the people. Are we to take it from what you just said, we all get put through the ringer, we all get put in the meat grinder in this town, and you're no exception. And I'm sorry that that happened to you. I wish that had not happened. But for the sake of this room, the people who are in this room, this democracy, this country, all the people around the world are watching what you're saying, Sarah, and the White House for the United States of America, the President of the United States should not refer to us as the enemy of the people. His own daughter acknowledges that, and all I'm asking you to do, Sarah, is to acknowledge that right now and right here.
I appreciate your passion. I share it. I've addressed this question. I've addressed my personal feelings. I'm here to speak on behalf of the president. He's made his comments clear.
So, Sarah, was that a yes or a no on press is the enemy of the American people? She talks about how she hasn't liked reports about her and satires of her, but that's not the question. The question is about the role and the perception of the media by this administration. And if you're a defender of the Constitution, if you believe in checks and balances, the answer to this question should be, and it really has to be, a completely unequivocal and definitive, no, of course the press is not the enemy of the American people. This wasn't a vague question, open to interpretation. It's Jim Acosta from CNN who asked the question here. He was specific. She still filibustered, didn't answer. And in fact, she's saying, yes, the press is the enemy. I speak for the president, she said. That's what Trump has said, and that's what the position of the administration appears to be. And bringing up satirical pieces done about her, I guess it's either to distract or to try to get some sympathy. She might be a more sympathetic character if she stopped telling depraved and horrific lies to the American people day in and day out. But it continues to amaze me how the party that claims to be against the safe spaces and the trigger warnings is regularly and so easily triggered. And what's dangerous and vile about this position is that it is even worse than what we've seen from some of the worst Republicans. I don't romanticize Bush. You know that,
right,
Pat. But even Bush would say directly, when he had big conflicts with individual media outlets, a free press is necessary and healthy to democracy. It's such a simple thing to say if you believe in it, and they're just not saying it because they don't believe in it.
And we also know that Sarah Huckabee Sanders' calling card is obfuscation, too.
Yeah.
So she could have walked that tightrope and done it a little bit better, right, between appeasing President Trump and also reassuring the importance of a free press. Like, she could have said that most outlets are totally fine, but there are some liberal reporters out there doing a horrible job, and named them, for example. Like, she could have done both things. She could have played both sides there like she normally does. She decided not to go with it, though.
I don't know if calling out specific reporters would be walking the tightrope necessarily, but the big picture is creeping authoritarianism. And when it's all said and done, either in 2020 or in 2024, I hope that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is remembered for what she's become, which is one of the most disgusting participants in this aberrant administration, and aberrant not on policy, but in terms of its just fundamental and basic disrespect for the base tenets of the foundation of the United States of America. Send me your thoughts if you're as concerned as I am about the battle against the press. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Michael Mayer. Michael Mayer has been a recent addition to the membership rolls of the David Pakman Show. We're mostly funded by members like Michael Mayer, But I don't want to forget our long-term sustaining members. And today's longtime member of the day is Matt Hauser. Matt Hauser's been with us about 5.5 years, going on 6 years. Michael, Matt, thank you. Join them both at www.joinpakman.com. Memberships are available at a 40% discount if you so choose by using the coupon code VOTESOON18. I have potentially good news for you, except that it's total BS. And what I mean is that there was a report which, if true, would be really great news, which is that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, the biggest gun lobby in the United States, they are claiming to have such deep financial trouble that they may be unable to continue existing, which would be lovely news, except it is very clearly an attempt to garner more support and to push back against what they feel is an unfair case being made against an insurance program of theirs by New York State. And all of this information came from a document that the NRA filed, which Rolling Stone obtained. And what the NRA's filing says is that because of a lawsuit that is being brought against them by New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and New York State financial regulators, they have become victims of a blacklisting campaign by the state and have suffered tens of millions of dollars in damages. And what they claim is they can't access basic financial services that they need in order to operate, that they're facing, quote, irrecoverable loss and irreparable harm. They say that they've lost insurance coverage that they need for day-to-day operations, that some of their physical offices are at risk, that their video streaming service and magazine may have to shut down. This is all fantastic. I can't imagine better news here, but I am very clear that these claims are being completely exaggerated since they are being made in a filing against New York State. They say that they've been unfairly targeted by state regulators over what the state claims is the illegal sale of NRA-branded insurance for gun owners. The NRA was offering this insurance called Carry Guard. And what Carry Guard would do is, if you are a gun owner and member of the NRA, and you legally fire a gun, and as a result of legally firing that gun, you incur legal expenses, Carry Guard NRA insurance will reimburse you for those legal expenses. Lovely little program that they have, isn't it? So I think that if true, this would be great news. I want the NRA to disappear. They exist to increase gun sales. They exist to make people afraid of the world so that they go out and they buy guns. And now we're learning that they also existed during the 2016 campaign to work as a conduit between Russia and the Trump campaign, funneling tons of foreign money to Donald Trump. But do I believe even for a second that the NRA is on the verge of disappearing? Obviously not. Obviously not. The NRA is very clearly exaggerating the supposedly dire state of their financial position. They're misrepresenting their financial situation to get donations, to turn people against the state of New York. This is a stunningly well-funded organization, and I don't believe it at all that they are at risk.
Yeah, I too think it's a fundraising plea, especially because Republicans are in control of the government now. And what helps the NRA is making the case that the government's going to take away your guns, and they especially make that case after like a mass shooting.
Sure. Because
Republicans are in charge of everything, they can't effectively communicate that case.
In the same way that gun manufacturers have been suffering when it comes to gun sales, partially because you don't have a Democrat in the White House that the NRA is saying he's about to take your guns. Maybe the NRA has been suffering mildly when it comes to membership and so on and so forth. But they've got, as we learned, foreign money coming in. They've got domestic money coming in. And this is all a ploy to suggest that the New York State lawsuit against them is unfair interference in what the NRA does. But this is a PR campaign. It's bottom line, that's what it is. The NRA is not a responsible organization. It's a political organization. It's a business organization that works exclusively for gun manufacturers to sell more guns in more places. And there's been a big campaign on Twitter started to send the NRA thoughts and prayers, which of course is a reference to how the NRA always will send thoughts and prayers after shootings, which of course do nothing. And I think it's equally likely that thoughts and prayers on Twitter won't do anything for the NRA's supposed fundraising woes, which I would argue barely barely exists. So don't fall for this, although it would be something to rejoice about if indeed the NRA went out of business. They're not going out of business, and this is just an attempt to get more money out of people. Last week, when I was in New Orleans, Louisiana for Netroots Nation, I reported to you that the online streaming service Spotify removed some episodes of Alex Jones' podcast for violations of their community guidelines, content guidelines in terms of service. We also reported that Facebook and YouTube have sort of sporadically been pulling some individual pieces of Alex Jones content off the air. And then this morning, I woke up to the news that Apple has made the decision to remove all Alex Jones and InfoWars content from iTunes, which is, of course, one of the biggest audio streaming and podcasting services in the world. The entire library is being removed. And piggybacking on this, we also learned this morning that Spotify and Facebook will be removing even more Alex Jones content from their libraries. So let's go through this piece by piece. Question one, was anything of value lost? Is anything of value lost by the removal of Alex Jones content from different places on the internet? The answer is an emphatic
no.
No, absolutely not. Is this censorship of Alex Jones? Well, let's think about that. He can still produce the show, right? So not being on iTunes has no impact on whether he can get up, put his pants on one leg at a time, or maybe jumping into both legs at once. I wouldn't presume to know how Alex Jones puts his pants on.
Maybe he's not wearing pants.
Maybe he's not even.
He has a desk there.
You don't see even below the desk. Go into his studio and do his show. No, he can still produce the show. He can distribute it on his own servers if he wants. I don't know that that's something that he does. And he can put the content any place that will have him. Now, do I understand why he would call it censorship? The answer is yes. Would I be saying the same things if iTunes banned the David Pakman Show? I probably would. But what we have to think about here is there a double standard? And on the one hand, claiming to be a free market, libertarian-minded individual who wants businesses to have the opportunity and the right and the ability to make decisions that they want to make about their platform, which they built with their money, right? Ultimately, that's what Apple did with iTunes. Or do we say that they should be forced to host Alex Jones's content? And part of the problem with Jones specifically is that he's a conspiracy theorist who partially makes money claiming that everybody wants to suppress his speech because they don't want the ultimate truths he's telling to get out there. When iTunes then pulls him off, I think it definitely bolsters that narrative with his audience, of course. You've got a conspiracy theorist, their content gets singled out for removal, that becomes evidence of the conspiracy to suppress the dangerous truths that Alex Jones is willing to tell. The reality is the content isn't being pulled off iTunes or wherever because it's conspiratorial. It's being removed because it's against Apple's hate speech guidelines. Facebook's explanation is similar, not conspiracies, but glorifying of violence, using dehumanizing language to refer to people who are transgender, Muslim, and immigrants. Spotify now removing all Alex Jones content, says it's because he is expressly and principally promoting, advocating, or inciting hatred or violence against a group or individual based on characteristics. So the question for me is more about what is legally okay for these companies to do. I don't think anyone would argue that any of these companies are doing anything that is sort of against the law or certainly not a violation of the First Amendment, because we're not talking about the government. And then we can start thinking about, is there anything that makes content publishing platforms different, right? Could you say that because Spotify and Facebook and YouTube have massive curation power, that it's a form of suppressing speech? I don't know. That's certainly the case that the defenders of Alex Jones are going to make. I actually don't know how it took this long for Jones to become a liability on these platforms, right? I mean, the Sandy Hook truther stuff, Pizzagate, only now the platforms are saying we're going to pull him off. I guess it's probably partially because of public outcry. Yeah,
and I mean, he's been saying crazy stuff for a long time, but it's getting worse and worse. I feel like after Sandy Hook would be the time to do it, right?
I was thinking of an analogy to what Alex Jones has been doing, and I thought, let's say I want to write a book, right? And I've mentioned I've thought about writing a book. I've talked to literary agents. I would need a publisher for the book, or I can choose to self-publish, which would be sort of like Alex Jones saying, well, I'm going to put the content on my own servers so nobody can pull it off of there. If I bring the book to 50 publishers and they all say, no, we don't want to publish it, are my ideas being suppressed? Do I have any right to be published by a publisher who publishes other political books? I think the answer is obviously no. Now, you might hear me make that analogy and say, David, that's different. A book publisher makes individual deals with writers. Spotify, Facebook, YouTube, whoever, these are platforms where the default is anybody can make an account and upload stuff. So with publishing of a book, it's a decision to publish that the business makes. With Facebook and YouTube and Spotify and iTunes, they're making the decision to say, we're going to remove Alex Jones content, and that's a different situation. I think it's a distinction without a relevant difference. It was Rand Paul who said something about single-payer healthcare would make doctors slaves or something like that.
Right, because they would have to work, because they would have to cover everyone.
Or provide services to everybody.
Yeah, they don't have to be doctors if they don't want to. They can choose another job.
So then the analogy from what Rand Paul said here is, are you enslaving iTunes if you force them to host Alex Jones's content? You can't really make the argument Rand Paul made without applying the same logic to Spotify or iTunes or Facebook. And also interesting, of course, is that the same people who simultaneously argue businesses should be able to do whatever they want as long as it's not illegal. They should be able to, it should be legal to discriminate against people on the basis of their sexual orientation, real or perceived, for example. But they should be forced to host Alex Jones content? That doesn't really make sense to me. They should be able to deny a gay person service, but you're forced to publish Alex Jones's Pizzagate rantings and Sandy Hook trutherism. I would actually make the case that since being gay isn't a choice, but being a violence-inciting conspiracy theorist is, business should be allowed to discriminate against violence-inciting conspiracy theorists way before they should be allowed to discriminate against gay people. But that's, I think, going a little bit deeper than maybe the specifics of the Alex Jones situation warrant. If you disagree with me, and I know from the messages I was getting on Twitter earlier today, there are people who believe I am being hypocritical here, that if it was me being targeted, that I would have a different view. That may be because I would have a very emotional response, but if I'm violating terms of service, aren't I just violating terms of service? If you disagree with me, let me know. This is also being discussed on the David Pakman Show subreddit at davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Discuss it there. We will take a quick break and be back with plenty more right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Billy DeLancey, who's the co-founder and CEO of Lobbyists for Good, which is a crowdfunding platform that enables everyday people to hire professional lobbyists. So, Billy, this is sort of, there's this debate in politics about inside-outside strategies. Do you work within a system to your advantage, or do you try to change the system if you believe that the system is fundamentally broken, corrupt, or otherwise not working properly? When it comes to lobbying, this is, I think you would agree, an extraordinarily corrosive element of American politics, but it is here and it appears to be here to stay. Is your argument on that basis, let's see if we can use it to do some good?
That's exactly it, David, and thanks for having me on the program. Lobbying isn't going to go away, even if we were to pass a law that banned lobbying, having people not allowed to lobby, that would be guaranteed to be thrown out because of the First Amendment. There's a line that says that everybody has the right to petition the government for redress of grievances. So that's exactly right how you said it. Why don't we use the tools available to change the system and get everyday people to have a stronger voice in government?
How does the platform work? Is it sort of like a Kickstarter for lobbying?
That's exactly what it is. And we actually use that description when describing it to people. Individuals, everyday American citizens or green card holders, can go onto our platform and submit ideas or campaigns around issues that they care about. And if the individual campaign raises $5,000 within 100 days, we will go ahead and find a lobbyist here in DC to advocate for their cause on Capitol Hill.
Now, how much professional lobbying does $5,000 get you? Because it feels like it might get you, a paragraph email or something like that.
Yeah, not much. The reason we have the $5,000, and most people, that's the first thing they point out to, we had it higher originally, but because we're a new organization, because we don't have a large email list, we wanted the barrier of entry to be a little bit lower. So we have $5,000 right now, about 40 hours of lobbying. And the thing is that we're going to do a lot of the back end research. So when you start a lobbying campaign, there's a lot of work around strategy, researching the issue, identifying targets on the Hill. We're going to do a lot of that so that the people that we hire will be able to go directly to the Hill and use that time to meet one-on-one with legislators and their staff.
So let's think through sort of in total, when we think about the amount of money that might be raised on your platform for individual lobbying efforts. Hypothetically, if all of that money were pooled together and used to try to change the system of lobbying and campaign finance that we have, might it have a bigger impact?
It's an interesting question, but I think we might be thinking a little bit too big. I started the platform to help people. There's a woman who started a campaign who's a female veteran, and there's a bill in Congress that would help force the VA to look after female veterans because it's just not such a male-dominated system. So that type of effort could pass a bill like that, 5,000, 10,000, because it has bipartisan support and just needs a push to the end. We lobbied for the Institute of Peace, which is an organization that tries to mitigate and lessen violent conflicts around the world. And we spent about 40 hours, and we were able to increase their budget by $3 million. So do I think that this is a platform that's going to change our democracy and fix every problem that we have? I don't know. I hope it's a useful tool, but it's one of many, many things that need to happen. But I think that we're going to be very successful by helping these issues and these people who don't know where to even begin, or who call their legislator, convince their legislator, but need to reach all 534 other senators in Congress. Well, I should say 532 if they get both senators and the congressman. So we're trying to focus more on just giving that individual person a stronger voice. Whether or not we can be used as a tool to fix all that ails American democracy, I'm not convinced yet, but I hope that we can be part of the solution.
Can you talk a little bit about how the lobbying process works? I mean, I think people generally have an understanding that, for example, like a large corporate lobby gets like the NCTA, which lobbies on the behalf of telecom and cable providers. Those cable providers and big companies give NCTA a bunch of money, and then NCTA goes and does what? Like, what is the actual nuts and bolts of the lobbying process?
A lot of it's just building relationships and using those relationships to get 30 minutes of the staffer's time. That's an interesting example about the telecom, because they have hundreds and hundreds of lobbyists working for them every day. And most of those lobbyists are connected, whether they worked on the Hill before, or whether or not they're former members of Congress themselves. But an organization like that uses those relationships and uses the money that they give to political candidates to get the access, to get that staffer's 20 minutes at the right time when the bill that they're working on is at the right moment when they need a favor or they need an action on it. And it really is about that relationship building. I'll give a story about our experience in lobbying. We identified the Institute of Peace as an organization that really was important and was completely ignored by both Democrats and Republicans. And so what we did is we hired a lobbyist, a Republican, who had worked with a lot of people in foreign aid and foreign affairs. And all we did, and we didn't give a dime to any political candidates. We didn't, walk into Congress with a bag of money. We emailed him, and he used a lot of his personal connections from when he worked on the Hill, and we just asked for 30 minutes of people's time. And we went in with a good argument. And we said, this is why the Institute of Peace needs to be funded at a higher level. The war in Iraq is winding down, and when it does, there are going to be a lot of conflicts between the groups that came together to fight ISIS or ISIL. And we need somebody to be there to talk to those groups and have a peace mediation, conflict resolution. And it worked. And we were able to get $3 million pretty much on a $3,000 effort so that they could increase the programs that they were doing in Iraq and Afghanistan. So to answer your question, sorry if I was long-winded, it's about accessing the people who you need to reach, and it's about going in with a good argument and then having appropriate follow-up for when the bill that you're concerned about is in the legislative process, to reach out to those people and say, listen, this is how I want you to vote. I need you to co-sponsor, and kind of that's how you can work the system.
So $3,000 in lobbying spend for $3 million in funds seems like, is that a 10,000% return? I'm not sure. I didn't exactly run the numbers, but it seems like it might be a 10,000% return. Do you have data about what the return is on lobbying investment, either across the entire lobbying space, within particular industries, or any data you might have about that?
It's not our data, but it's the Sunlight Foundation did a study. And they found, and I'll give 3 examples, when oil companies lobbied for a subsidy that would benefit them, they found a 5,000% return on their investment. When corporations banded together and lobbied for a tax holiday, a corporate tax holiday, and I think the year was 2003, 2004, they found a 22,000% return on their investment. And when pharmaceutical companies lobbied for the provision in Medicare where they couldn't compete the drug prices, and I'm a little iffy on exactly what they lobbied for, but it was about competing for drug prices, 76,000% return on their investment. And so we're hoping that we can have that kind of ROI for the people. And I'll just really quick, I used to work in foreign affairs, foreign aid, and we lobbied for an increased budget in foreign aid. And I gave $20 to Save the Children, a wonderful organization that does a lot of good work around the world and here in the U.S. And then when we lobbied for them, we were able to get bumps of $2 million, $4 million. So individuals can do a great service by donating, but a lot of the change really does come from government, whether it's a policy, whether it's funding. The return on investment of a lobbyist is staggering.
How does your organization determine what a good project is? In other words, people could disagree about what priorities should be or about what really deserves attention or lobbying funds spent on it. So what's sort of the infrastructure to determine what is good enough?
Well, that's a great question, and one that we struggled with. We don't want to drive policy. We want to be a tool, a resource to connect people outside of the Beltway to people who have influence in government so that they can have a stronger voice. And so what we decided to do is just have a set of founding principles that every lobbying campaign must meet. And if it meets those founding principles, we will host it on our platform, even if it's something that we don't necessarily support 100%. But everything within those founding principles will be hosted on our platform. And it's pretty simple. It has to be for the common good. And that means that it can't benefit an industry, it can't benefit a group of people. Specifically, it has to benefit everybody as a whole. It has to be driven by, the second one is it has to be driven by the people. So a CEO of a telecom communications can't submit a campaign to our platform and advocate for defeating net neutrality. So it has to be citizens driven. The other things that are required, number 3, is that it has to be have a chance of bipartisanship. So anything super far left or super far right, where nobody on the other party is going to, we call it dead on arrival in the Hill. We won't host campaigns like that. And that kind of weeds out any of these extreme policies, extreme politics, the ideological extremes that could be on our platform. So we have that as a protector. And then the other thing, the last thing, is that it needs to be underrepresented. there's a lot of good nonprofits out there. There's a lot of great organizations that lobby for some great causes. And if if people's money is going to be better donated to that organization, we'll instruct the person to fundraise for that organization. But what we found is, even if there is a great nonprofit that has 3, 4, 5 lobbyists, they're going against 50, 60, 70 better paid lobbyists from the corporate or from the special interest group that opposes. So we haven't used that underrepresented one yet, but we do feel that we want to be kind of the voice for the voiceless. So those
super
are the four.
interesting, super interesting.
Yeah.
And I encourage people to check out the Lobbyists for Good website. We've been speaking with Billy DeLancey, who's the co-founder and CEO of Lobbyists for Good. Billy, we'll be following it, and I look forward to seeing the success of future campaigns.
I appreciate it, David. Thanks so much for having me on.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, so if you've been watching the program for a while, if you listen to the show, you know that I have no delusions about blue states or liberal cities or just all Democrats or whatever being clean of racism, so to speak, to differing degrees. Even our bluest cities and most progressive institutions and most self-described liberal people still harbor racist prejudice and beliefs. And I've done interviews about the significant racism that existed historically in our broadcast city of Boston, in New York City, where I used to live. I've talked about how segregated these cities still are to this day. And even on college campuses, liberal college campuses, in liberal cities in blue states, there is still plenty of racism. And I have a story for you today from the hometown of the David Pakman Show, Northampton, Massachusetts, where we started, and specifically from Smith College, which is an extremely liberal college, where I have both family and friends that work as faculty and staff. And the story has gone completely national. And the story is that of a black student who was eating lunch in a common room, and she had the police called on her by a Smith College employee because she looked reportedly out of place. I'm talking about Umu Kanute, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, who's a sophomore at Smith College and teaches chemistry to high schoolers over the summer. She was reading and eating lunch in the Tyler House dorms dining hall. I've been in the Tyler House many times, a completely normal place where people exist in the world like you would expect on any college campus, and sometimes consume food for the purposes of synthesizing it into nutrients to harbor the power of life, right? Completely normal activity that we all participate in. And next thing you know, a police officer is walking in with a Smith College employee, and they tell her they're wondering why she's there. Police told her that an employee had called them about what was initially described as a suspicious black man. Of course, she's a woman. And now the college has both apologized to her and has suspended or put on leave pending an investigation the employee who made the call, who, as far as I saw a couple hours ago, still has not been identified publicly. And it's also not clear exactly what was suspicious about eating lunch. Officer, the food appeared to be extremely spicy and well-dressed. Please hurry up. The student says she did nothing wrong. She wasn't making noise. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was just black, as she describes it. So to be clear, we're not talking here about institutional racism. It's not a lesson about Smith College being liberal and for Black Lives Matter and whatever else, but still being racist as an institution. As far as we know right now, barring the news that this was related to some kind of policy, this was just one employee. But it's just another reminder that there's racism everywhere, even in blue states, even in blue cities, even at liberal progressive colleges. This individual could be anybody. They could have any political beliefs. I have no idea, since we don't know exactly who it is right now. But the other really odd thing is that to call the police about this, instead of just walking up to the person and saying, hey, who are you? It implies either that the Smith employee was really genuinely intimidated by this woman, which, okay, would be a little odd, or that they were cowards. and that they said, I'm going to try to get somebody else to do the dirty work that I need done. But even that element of it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I think all the blame goes to the employee. You can't really even blame the police officer necessarily, because if they're responding to a call,
sure,
they got to investigate. I would just hope that at the end of the conversation there, the police officer would instruct the employee to investigate a little bit on their own, or at least not make such an impulsive decision.
There is one other possibility, which is, as I mentioned, the report was allegedly about a suspicious black male. Is it possible that the person that the police ended up speaking to, who was this woman, was not the person about whom the report was originally filed? Like, it's such a basic question, and I've not seen follow-up on that. I don't know. Like, was this even the person who the report was about? I don't know. But the impact so far is that the student has been significantly traumatized by this, understandably. The employee in question has been placed on leave. And as always, we get into, can we really attribute this to personal racism? Was the individual who called the police personally racist? I don't know. The underlying circumstances are that an employee at a prestigious, expensive private school thought that a black student eating lunch looked out of place. Was it their clothing that made them look out of place? Was it the food that they had? Was it their race? I don't know that we can really know for sure. We always hear the right say you can't know 100% what's in someone's head, but I think it's perfectly reasonable to talk about race as a factor here.
Well, yeah, I mean, usually there's no control group to compare it to when we hear about these stories.
It's one incident.
Yeah, because it's just one incident, but there are white students, I'm sure, eating lunch in that common hall every single day. And I take it that they're not getting the police called on them.
I've not heard about any such incidents. That's a good question, though. And it's important, you know, I think at the end of the day, what's important is don't allow the right to shut down an exploration of race as a motivating factor. Because the right is very quick to say, you can't accuse people of racism unless you know it definitively. There could have been other reasons why the police were called on this particular individual, and to attribute racism to someone when you're not 110% sure that that's what it is, that's wrong. Okay, that may be, but they can't say that you can't talk about race as a factor here. To attribute specific, we don't even know who the person was, but don't allow the topic of race to be suppressed by those individuals.
Yeah, the worst thing in the world is to be accused of being racist. So says the right wing.
Yes, that's a common refrain that we hear from them. We'll see ultimately what else we learn about the circumstances underlying this. We have been covering the hit that tourism in the United States has taken under Donald Trump, and I was thinking to myself, if world tourism were down and U.S. tourism were also down, it might have nothing to do with Donald Trump, right? We can't say if tourism is down everywhere among the United States or including the United States that it's because of Donald Trump. But we now have a new report showing that actually worldwide in the developed world, there has been a boom in travel. And yet the United States and one other country, Turkey, in what's considered the developed world, have seen a decrease in travel. And it's becoming increasingly clear that many elements of Donald Trump being president of the United States are really hurting the hospitality industry big time, partially because people are saying, if Trump's president, I don't want to go to the United States. The U.S. Travel Association has confirmed that not only has travel been down under Donald Trump to the United States, they project that in 2018, it's going to end up down even more. And when you look at the numbers in terms of percentages, they're not obviously huge. U.S. tourism was 12.9% of world tourism when Trump took over the presidency. It was down to 12% last year. It's down to 11.7% in 2018. But what you have to consider is, given the size of this pie of worldwide tourism, or tourism to developed nations, 0.5% represents a massive amount of money and a huge number of tourism dollars and a significant number of tourism and hospitality-related jobs. And what every indication points to are a few different factors. Number one, the travel ban itself is keeping some people out of the country, right? Like, some people can't come to the United States because of the travel ban. The existence of the travel ban is making more people choose not to come to the United States. Trump's policy on climate change is keeping people in some parts of the world out of the United States. Trump's attacks on other countries, including some of our allies, are keeping other people from traveling to the United States. And meanwhile, this is not a worldwide phenomenon. Tourism is up in the entire developed world, again, except in the United States and in Turkey. Spain, Australia, Canada, on and on and on. Significant increases in tourism. And at the bottom, the United States down 6% overall, and Turkey down 6.7% overall. Turkey, partially, is because a number of countries have travel warnings about the safety of going to that country. So when you look at that and you say, here's the list of developed countries for the purposes of this study, Turkey has significant security issues that countries are warning people about against traveling there. You see that it is indeed Donald Trump that is a disaster for the American tourism industry. And this is an example of something that takes a while to fix. If Trump left office tomorrow, you don't immediately get tourism back. We've seen graduate students decrease applications to come to graduate school in the United States. These are processes, planning a trip, sometimes months ahead of time, applying to and moving to another country to go to school. These things take a while, and it's going to be a while even after Donald Trump leaves office for this to reverse course.
And I don't think they would even care, right? Republicans, by and large, wouldn't care, because if you're visiting the U.S. from a foreign country, chances are you're going to the cities, right? Maybe you're going to New York City, or maybe you're going to, like, Hawaii, which is another blue area.
Sure.
So that's not their voter base. They wouldn't care so much.
Maybe they say, we don't really want people from other countries coming here. I mean, Sweden and Norway would be fine, of course, but we don't necessarily want these individuals in the country. They could overstay visas. They might be the same types of people that we're trying to deport on a regular basis. And even though this is bad for our economy, it sort of is the logical conclusion for this insular, anti-immigrant, xenophobic, jingoistic agenda that we've been covering on the behalf of the Trump administration for nearly 2 years now. And if the idea was stop people from wanting to come to the United States, at least when it comes to people coming for tourism, it actually seems to be working. Although I don't know whether that's actually what the Republicans in Congress, in the Senate, and in the Oval Office intended. Last week, I told you that breastfeeding in public had been legally affirmed in 50 states with, I think it was Idaho and Utah, which were the holdovers, or the holdbacks that hadn't yet done that. One caller, known to us as the Texas Troll, is not at all pleased with the idea of me affirming public breastfeeding. Take a listen to this.
David, I really don't think it's too much to ask for women just to go to the bathroom to breastfeed their children. It just doesn't really make much sense to me, just, go into a private place to do it. I mean, do you really think it should be legal for a woman just to take her shirt off on an airplane and start breastfeeding? I mean, with her tatas hanging all over the place? Do you really think that's okay? Really? Have some decency, man. That's disgusting.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, just as a purely practical matter, have you ever seen a breastfeeding woman just take off her top when she's going to breastfeed? I've actually never seen that.
Never happened to me, no.
No, that's just not the way it works. And number two, you're saying it should be against the law to do that? How is that even remotely logical?
I mean, can't you just look away, too? I understand how it could maybe make you uncomfortable, like if you're sitting next to a woman on a plane who's breastfeeding, but just deal with it, right? Look away, do something else, right?
How is this worthy of even a call to a program to say that it's disgusting? That this really seems like a person who has bigger issues, I would imagine, than somebody breastfeeding in public. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. Even though to so many of us it's obvious that this should not be a legal issue, I've got people calling in and saying, David, how dare you think it's legal for a woman to breastfeed in public and expose a breast? How on earth would I determine that it should be illegal? That's what seems actually crazy to me.
Free the nipple, man.
Free it, absolutely. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Become a member at www.joinpakman.com to instantly access the bonus show. You can also get access by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.